Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're not familiar with the format, what we're going to be doing here is we will go ahead and recap the latest news from the solar industry for the last week or so. And then we'll try and highlight upcoming webinars, upcoming events that are of interest to the solar PV industry. And then we'll go into a deep dive on a topic that I find of relevance to the solar industry. And this week we're going to talk about the OpenSolar program, which is a free online program that will help you do remote site assessments and the design of your solar systems. So a lot of folks have asked me about what program is good, what program can you use. There are a bunch of them out there. Some of them are very expensive. Obviously, they're very good as well. And if you're a solar professional, maybe you're using one of those. But OpenSolar is also quite a good program, not as maybe robust as some of them that cost $20 or $30 or $40 or $200 a month, but it's free. So I like that. And I'll explain or try to explain why it's free. All right, so this is the news from the solar industry for the week of March 2nd, 2025. In case you're coming to the recorded version of this, the U.S. residential solar market struggled in 2024 with installations declining about 26% over 2023. Much of the decline was due to changes in net metering policy in California, which reduced compensation for those exporting power to the grid by about 75%. Now, as a result, installations in the state of California dropped by over 40%. And in 2023, just to give you a sense of why that's important, California accounted for about 25% of all of the residential solar installed nationwide. Now, other factors that led to this decline in residential solar installations included higher interest rates and increased tariffs, which added to the cost of installing a system. But residential solar only makes up about 22% of the overall solar market. So utility scale solar accounts for about 72% of all solar installed nationwide. And that segment saw a dramatic growth of 44% year on year over 2023. So as a result, solar made up about 64% of all the new generating capacity added to the grid last year. And when you add in storage, that comes up to about 84%. Fossil fuels, on the other hand, specifically natural gas, only accounted for about 4% of the generating capacity added to the grid. That's new generating capacity on the grid. The Energy Information Administration, or EIA, anticipates that about 63 gigawatts of utility scale generation capacity will be added to the grid this year in 2025. And of that, about 81% is going to be solar and storage. This, according to a report that they issued last week. Now, this represents a 30% increase over 2024, which was 48.6 gigawatts that was added to the grid in the US. And that was the largest, that was a record, the largest amount added to the grid since 2002, according to EIA. So they're anticipating quite a bit robust activity. In 2024, generators added 30 gigawatts of solar, accounting for 61% of the additions. EIA expects this trend to continue this year, adding 32.5 gigawatts of new utility scale solar. And Texas and California are going to account for about half of that will be added this year. In 2024, power providers added 10.3 gigawatts of battery storage, and EIA projects this could almost double to 18.2 gigawatts added this year. And the rest is going to come from 7.7 gigawatts of wind, 4.4 gigawatts of natural gas. And now these projections do not factor in any possible policy changes that are coming from the new administration, but they don't seem to feel that that's going to be relevant because most of these projects that are in this projection are already in the final stages of development. So they shouldn't really be affected by any new policies. Households and businesses will pay more for electricity over the next decade if Congress repeals the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits on clean electricity, according to a recent study by Clean Energy Buyers Association. In 2029, by 2029, if full repeal takes place, it would increase the cost of electricity for residential solar by about 7.3%. And for commercial or industrial customers by about 10.6%, or blended, that would be about a 9.2% increase in the cost of electricity over what it would be if they left the Inflation Reduction Act policies in place. Electricity demand is expected to increase by 50% over the coming decade due to increased demand from data centers, reshoring of manufacturing, the electrification of industry, as well as the electrification of the transportation industry with the adoption of electric vehicles. Full repeal would reduce direct spending in the power sector by about $250 billion, according to this report, leading the total installation of wind and solar basically cutting it in half versus if the repeal is not taken, if it does not go through. Now, basically what their conclusion is kind of a recap of Economics 101. If you see a lot more demand without a corresponding supply increase, then the prices are going to go up. U.S. demand for residential off-grid systems is rising faster than that for on-grid systems, but from a far smaller base, obviously. This is according to a 2024 study funded by Thompson Endowment and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Now, the compounded annual growth rate for off-grid storage is between 7 and 10%, compared with a growth for grid-tied storage at around 6%. The rapidly rising utility costs, as well as the declining cost of batteries, is cited as a major reason for this process, why people are going off-grid. Well, there is a large part of the off-grid market that are truly off-grid. There is no connection to the utility present, so their only option is off-grid. But they're starting to see a lot more grid-tied systems basically disconnecting from the grid and finding it to be a financially attractive option. 5 states specifically, Hawaii, California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, were identified as prime off-grid savings locations because of very high electric rates, some of these seeing as much as a 6-year return on the investment of going off-grid. The surge in adding storage to homes that are currently connected to the grid is also a factor here. For example, in California last year, 60% of all the installations included batteries. And if you're already connected to the grid with battery backup and solar, then the move to going off grid is relatively easy and relatively painless. Now, each year, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance evaluates state policies to see how friendly they are to the adoption of renewable energy within those states. And they publish this as a community power scorecard. The nonprofit group assesses 18 different policy categories, all the way from net metering to ease of interconnection to third-party ownership and perhaps community solar policies, and then issues a letter grade based on these on their scorecard. Well, in 2024, of the 50 states in the Washington, D.C., only one state received a grade that was above average. They got a B. That was the state of Illinois. 13 hit a C average, 14 received Ds, and 23 states got a failing grade of an F. Scoring highest for policy friendly to the adoption of solar were Illinois, Oregon, Colorado, New York, and California. And those states least friendly, according to this report, to the adoption of renewable energy were Alabama, South Dakota, Tennessee, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. Does anybody online have anything they'd like to add or any comments about that, what we just went over? Give you just a second. All right, then I'll go ahead and jump into some of the announcements that we're dealing with for this week and the coming weeks. All right, let me just adjust my screen there. So March 4th, we're seeing that solar layouts, this is actually this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And I think this one's based on utility scale design, utility solar. On March 6th at 1 p.m., there's a webinar here on AI, nuclear, and data centers. So we'll see that's available. And I always try and just remind you, I'm just letting you know these webinars exist. You can Google them, find them out. Oftentimes I'll have the reference of who's putting it on, like this one, Solar Power World. Should be able to find it. March 6th, CPS 250 kW inverters. So if you're looking for a very large inverter, I'm sure this is a product demonstration type webinar. There's a conference, Wind plus Solar Finance in Phoenix, March 16th through the 19th. On the 20th at 2 p.m., there's one on battery innovations, what's happening in the battery world for 2025. Then this is one, I actually signed up for this one. I think it's going to be interesting. March 25th, grid demand growth. It's an 8:30 in the morning Eastern time webinar, but they're basically going to be saying, okay, we're facing unprecedented demand on the grid. So what are going to be the options? And I'm sure they're going to have experts who are going to promote their own thing, nuclear, wind, solar, whatever, natural gas. Who knows? It should be interesting. Distributech, March 24th through the 27th in Dallas, Texas. That's an in-person conference. Another in-person conference that same week is the NABCEP conference, which will be in Reno, Nevada. And then there's April 3rd is a webinar put on by Solar Power World about homeowners trends. So this is obviously geared towards installers, trying to see what trends you're seeing in homeowners and when you're trying to sell some of these systems. And then there's a Clean Power Conference in May in Phoenix, Arizona. And then, of course, our online classes and in-person classes at solarpvtraining.com. You're welcome to explore those. And that's what I had. So did anybody else have any specific announcements they want to give here? Before we get into my hot topic here, we tried to do this one last week, and we got into a real nice discussion with everyone online. Who's being very quiet this week. And so we were not able to get to this, but that was good because I didn't have to prepare another presentation this week. So I got a brief vacation. So anyway, so this week's topic is essentially using OpenSolar to design your projects. And I did want to just point out, you'll see the ETA logo up here on my screen. And ETA is going to be sponsoring this particular portion of the talk each week. As we said, ASUS, or the American Solar Energy Society, is working with us on the news, portion, and then ETA, the Electronic Technicians Association, that does certification of solar, amongst other certifications, has agreed to help promote all of this, the deep dive. And part of the reason for that is they do give half an hour continuing education credit for each of these sessions. So if you're certified and you need that continuing education, all you have to do is just go on to our website. You'll see you can just download a certificate of attendance and you're covered. So, all right, enough of that, enough of the background. So let's talk a little bit about OpenSolar and the online program here. And I found, I used to use, I can't even remember the name of it, but Solar Sketch or Sketch Solar or something like that. It was another free one. It was very, very basic, but it was almost too basic. And then they started getting into, you can do 5 for free, which was good. I wasn't doing that many of them, but then they started, as soon as I did 5, they kept trying to make me sign up and pay them $30 a month or whatever. And I was like, you said 5 a month for free. And so I gave up. But OpenSolar is a program that's available through, it's an Australian-based company. And the nice thing about it, it is truly free. You can do as many of these assessments as you would like. And what they're doing is monetizing their activity through promotion of some of the products. And the way they're doing this, I've not found to be overly intrusive. In fact, you can kind of bypass it if you want to, but apparently the manufacturers of these products find it's to their advantage to be up the list when you start selecting products. So I use this when I'm doing site assessments and I'm not really selecting product at that time. So I can just sort of ignore it and move on through. So I found it to be very, very robust. In fact, it takes a little while to get into all of the different things it can do. But you can do it very basic site assessment without a whole lot of training. There's a lot of online tutorials that you can walk through. And if you've used a design program like this in the past, going to be dead simple. These things work very similarly to each other. If you haven't, well, then there might be a little bit of a learning curve. This one has 2D and 3D capability. So the nice thing about 3D, obviously, is you can look at shading. You can see if the trees, what's the height of the trees, what's the three-dimensional orientation of your building. I've found, and this is my own bias, I don't like it. The drawings are real bizarre looking. I've just sort of found I don't have to get that exact for what I'm doing. So I like to use the 2D, such as what you see there. And what this image is showing you is essentially a Google Earth image. They do use two different programs. You can select from Google or you can select from Bing. So Bing has satellite imagery. I will tell you that I've kind of started always using Bing when I'm picking the two-dimensional images because they look better. They look cleaner, crisper. I don't know what their technology is. Maybe it's a newer system, but the imagery is 99 times out of 100, I prefer it. I will go in and do a little bit of a demonstration here, but what you're doing here is you get this image of the building that you're designing for, and you can then just lay out your panels on that building, and you can see the obstructions that may be there, like skylights or vents or things like that. You can avoid those. It'll also give you the azimuth of the so basically the east-west, north-south orientation of these panels. So that's nice. You don't have to measure that when you're on site. It doesn't really, I guess if you use the 3D, you could try and get the angle, whether it's 20% or 20 degrees or 15 degrees or whatever it is. I do that during the site evaluation. So I just plug that in. Okay, so we're partway through the introductory explanation. Does anyone have any questions as we move forward here? Just want to give you a little bit of time there. Peter, some county zoning office have aerial portals. Okay, yeah, so that may be the case. I will mention that one of the limitations of any remote site assessment is if it's a new building, and I've run into this many, many times, where you go into the system and all of a sudden there's just an empty field, or there's a construction site and no building there. Because when they took those images, the thing didn't exist, and that could be problematic. Yeah, Al, you've got a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering with today's panels, modern panels, is the angle critical?
Yeah, it's you mean the angle of the altitude, the 5 degrees, 20 degrees?
Yeah, for instance, if you have a low slope roof versus a steep roof.
It's going to affect it somewhat. Um, it's not perhaps as much as you might think, but I see it could be as much as 10% for sure. If you've got 5 degrees versus 20 degrees, most sites here in North America are going to want what's referred to as a summer bias. So the summer bias is essentially your latitude minus 15 degrees. So if you just use, I'm here in Ohio, we sort of use I-70 as 40 degrees north latitude. And if you're in Columbus, for example, which is I-70 right there, the ideal angle is going to be 25 degrees. And the reason for that is if you think about the sun, um, it's directly at a 90-degree angle on the autumnal and the vernal equinoxes. So March 22nd and September 22nd. So it's the perfect average. Your latitude would be the perfect average. But we get longer days in the summer and more sunlight in the summer. So if you're wanting to harvest the most sunlight over the course of the year, then you would take summer bias. You would basically
Okay.
latitude minus, you'd lay it down a little bit flatter. It just so happens that a lot of roofs around here, the what is it, 412 pitch or whatever, is going to be in that neighborhood of 20 to 25 degree pitch. So um, you can't change the pitch of your roof. If you're putting on the roof, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a ground mounted system, then yes, you can go in there and you can just figure out what's the optimal if you want to. But I would say that even with a ground mounted system, you may want to lay it down a little bit further than a perfect 25 degree, because 25 degrees pretty steep pitch. But it's going to be a bit more of a wind sail if it's up there. If you lay it flatter, it's going to deflect. But if you're going to use it as a carport or you're going to use it to store things under, having it like a 15-degree pitch is going to be more, maybe even a 10-degree pitch. It's going to be more useful. So you balance those things. But yeah, with if you're putting it on a roof, the angle and the azimuth, the orientation of the building is what it is. And but I do know with azimuth, if you have a building where the roof slopes are facing east-west versus south, because you want it to be solar south when you're in the northern hemisphere, but east-west versus south is only going to change your collection by about 20%. So a lot of people say, okay, well, my building faces east-west, so it's no good for solar. And that's just not true. You may have to put 20% more panels up there, but everything else is going to be exactly the same. So all right. That's a long way of answering your very simple question, but
Well, that's great. Thank you.
sure thing. All right. So then we also, as we say, they do have some shading analysis when you get into 3D. You can start to do a shading analysis based on the height. But once again, this is only as good as the imagery that's there. So if Google Earth was 8 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, or whatever, then if they're trees, it's measuring what the trees look like 4 years ago. So if they've grown or if they've been cut down, you're not going to have that. So there is no getting around doing a physical site assessment when you do this stuff. But this is a good way of getting a first glimpse at it. If you're in the world of doing solar, you're going to get a lot of folks who are going to call you up and they might just be wasting your time. So it's a good way of sort of pre-qualifying without having to drive 2 hours out to the site and 2 hours back. You can do a preliminary. Then if it looks like they're serious, then you go out and do an actual site assessment to see if anything's changed, if the tornado came through and blew down all the trees, or if these trees are suddenly bigger, or if somebody built a 6-story building right next door. Whatever it happens to be, you can see how that's going to be. Obviously, when you do the site assessment, you're going to look at other things like, what's the existing electrical service? How easy is it going to be to get from the roof to that electrical service? Is the wiring of the building adequate for this? Does the structure of the roof look adequate for this? There's a whole host of things you can't do remotely, but there's a number of things you can. So that's what OpenSolar is good for. They also have an integrated rack design tool here. I know that they're working with Iron Ridge. You can link straight into the Iron Ridge rack design program. Iron Ridge has a pretty good system for designing racking if you're using their product. They'll also give you a bill of materials and stuff like that. So they've just simply integrated in. They also work with scaffold companies. You can integrate in some scaffolding design on your project. I've never used that, but it's there. So, and I think this is where they make some money. You know, they're recommending products in there. They will produce a bill of materials, and they'll also allow you to order through their system. So again, this is another way that they can monetize this free program. Is you design it using their system, well, then you use them as a distributor. You know, you can then go ahead and purchase through their system. Again, I've never done that, so I can't comment on whether it's good, bad, indifferent, or if the prices are competitive or not. But it is an option. And then they also have some integrated selling features. They'll help you with cash flow issues. There is actually a payment portal there that you can do credit cards. You can process checks, Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of those things. I keep saying I've never used these things, but they're there. So that's kind of interesting. And then they also have some turnkey permitting. This could be very, very helpful if you're needing some projects that are stamped by a PE. You can do that through there. And I did notice, I think I got to zoom in on this. Their pricing's pretty good. You know, their cost for the plans, their cost for a stamped permit, pretty good. So if you've ever tried to find a PE or somebody who would stamp these things, you know, it's not bad. Okay, so I've got this thing here. So let's give it a spin here. Let me see. This is where I'm gonna use my talents to the max here. I'll have to jump in, and I should have brought it up. I never did I? Nope, that's not the one I want. Is that the one I want? I should have. Okay, so are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll jump in. It's always good when it works first try. All right, so I'm going to jump into OpenSolar. And this is the first screen. So you can enter in an address or you can go into your existing projects. So it will take in some projects here like, oh, find one that looks interesting. Let's see. This one looks good. All right, so this is one that we're just working on. So the first thing you want to do is put in your contact information. I'm sure Dan's going to love having his name and phone number right up there on the screen. Then it's going to ask you to enter in their usage, their electric bill usage. And in this case, you can do it in a number of ways. You can just simply estimate the annual, and it's going to project it out based on that region's consumption profile. So if you don't have an electric bill to look at, it's going to just distribute it based on how those people in that region utilize electricity, give you a curve, probably more usage in the summer, less in the winter because of air conditioning and like. In this case, I had an electric bill where I simply entered in month by month by month, and then it gives us a profile of what their electricity usage looks like, and it gives you their annual usage. So this is quite a big facility. It's an office building and uses 304,000 kilowatt hours each year. Then it's going to ask you for a price of electricity. You can go in and select a tariff if you want. So for instance, in this case, if I said select a tariff, it would pick what they think it's going to be in this region. And they'll give you different tariffs here, like AEP, Ohio, residential, co-op. These are some Duke for electrical commercial systems, and they're so oftentimes you'll find what you're needing and you can just simply pick that. You can select that off of there. Sometimes you won't find what you're looking for. It does give you an opportunity to enter all of that stuff in. I guess that's how they create their database. I've tried that at different times and failed. So normally what I do is I found it easier to just simply put a flat tariff in. So I'll take the electric bill and divide what it is by, divide the price by however many kilowatt hours they've consumed. That's not as detailed or not as specific because the other one will put in things like their fixed charges and demand charges and things like that. But I found that for my purposes, it's actually a little more accurate because I think the other one kind of understates the cost of electricity. I just like to put in real world numbers as near as I can get. A lot of these things are just going to be estimates anyway, trying to size your system. So once you've sized your system, then you've got your energy in there, you've got your costs, and then you want to go in and design the system. So what it will do is it'll bring up the site. And if you're, I've got this little picture here and I want to move it out of the way. I'm not sure if you guys can see all of the images on the side there, but so this is the building, and you can zoom in, move it around a bit. This is an old school that's been converted into offices. So based on their electrical consumption, we simply put in the panels, the number of panels. So for example, I found when I use this, the easiest way is I like to take the building, and if you're laying out the panels, you can just click here and add panels. If I zoom in, we can, so for instance, here you can just keep adding and adding. If you hold down the mouse, you can go across and just keep adding them like this. Now, as I'm adding panels, you'll see over to the left, the calculations change. The size of the array changes. The number of kilowatt hours that it's generating changes. It will give you a percentage of what what the consumption is that your design is there for. So the reason I like to, I'll extend them over because I like to try and treat the whole building as one array. You can create additional arrays, but it just confuses me when you do that. So I'll usually lay it out, even if I'm taking it across areas like I just did that aren't really suitable for solar, or maybe that's not where I want to put the solar, but it'll allow me to create this other area, and then I can delete these that are in between. So once I've got this one, it's still linked to the overall. So let's say I wanted to put some solar panels on the roof behind where those two big air conditioning units are. So I want to extend my system. Well, if you look at this, it's actually two different levels. So I couldn't actually run panels like that because the levels wouldn't work. But I can go ahead and make my connection, and then I'm going to just sort of fill up this area with a bunch of panels. And then I'm going to start messing with it by taking out the ones I don't want. But now I've made one big system, and so everything's connected. And so let's say I like that. Well, I don't want them going up that slope there. I want to have a walkway, so I'm going to take these panels away. It's got to calculate here for a second. So I'm going to take these that are in that transition point between the buildings. I've taken those out. Now, there are also some other things in here, like some vents and things that I saw. Like right here is a vent. I could zoom in on that. So I don't necessarily want to cover over the vent. I know there's a way you could make these panels translucent and you can see the obstructions that are underneath of it. I just don't remember how you do it, but I know you can. And so for instance, you can just make them clear. You'll see those obstructions underneath of it and you could delete the panels over top. So it's pretty easy to lay these things out as you see them. And if you're starting, let's say I want to put in a new array here. I could take my panel. You can flip it from landscape to portrait just by punching this button here. Um, See, now it's portrait. Now I want to go to landscape. This is a flat roof, so I've done ballasted. But when you're first laying out your panels, notice how you can adjust their azimuth. And over there on the left, it's going to tell you what the orientation is. So that's a nice way of getting your azimuth without having to do any measurements out on the site. It's going to give you that right there. If you want to, if I've selected the panels, here I can change that. If I go back, here I've got the panels here, but I want to change what my options are. How do I do that? Oh, it's telling me that I've selected a Jinko Solar 410, but if I want to change that, there's any number of panels here that I can go ahead and select. I'm sure Canadian Solar and Jinko have paid them something to put themselves up at the top, but there's whole bunches of them you can select from all over. And if I wanted to change it from Jinko, I could just say, okay, I'm going to do LG. I'm going to select this one, a 360, and now it's changed my panels. So that's as easy as all that. So it's nice to be able, and the nice thing about that is once you've selected those panels, it's now factored in the size of the panel and how much room they'll take on the roof and how much energy they're going to generate. Notice by reselecting that panel or picking a smaller panel, I just reduced my production. It was about 106%. Now it's down to 98%. So these are obviously smaller panels, not going to produce as much. Then you can do mounting systems, you can do inverters, you can select batteries. There's again a lot of things you can do if you're wanting to design the whole system. I use it mostly just to get a rough estimate. We do this for REAP grant assessments and things like that. So this is a nice tool for that. Then you can come down here to pricing. And here, what I've done is, in this case, I entered it in as enter the price manually per watt. So the price per watt estimate on this system that I put in is $2.25 a watt. Again, that's based on industry averages. When I'm doing these, I tend to want to put in prices that are a little bit higher than what I think the installer is going to price it at. Maybe an installer is going to come in at about $2 a watt. I would hope for a system this size, they probably would. But I still want to give the customer, I'd rather them be pleasantly surprised than unpleasantly surprised. So since I'm not bidding on the job. You know, if I were bidding on the job, you'd have to sharpen your pencil and get down to what you can live with. But in this case, I'm just trying to give them a rough estimate of what it would cost. So you can put the pricing in there. And then they have incentives. And the incentives here are all over the place. Like if this were in an energy community, I could just click that box and then this would put in the 10% energy community adder. If it's, they have a federal of 40% with the bonus. I guess that's a quick way if you're just doing both. This one is ComEd if they've got solar rebates. This is from Connecticut. The ones I usually deal with are the energy community, Then the federal investment tax credit, that's the 30% that you get. Once again, if you're if you're intending to use American-made products, which up till this point have not been widely available, so I've tended to ignore that. But if you are sure that you're going to use American-made products, then maybe put the 40% tax credit in there because you get a 10% kicker if you've got all of the uh, American-made products. Then there's a lot of state-specific ones. Then you can come down here, and the REAP grant is right down here. So if you're applying or doing this for a REAP grant, currently we're putting the REAP grant estimate in at 25%. It was up until last year, well, inclusive of last year, up until January. Something happened in January, so we had to reduce the amount for this credit. So we reduced it from 50% to 25%. So that's the anticipated level of subsidy that you can get or grant that you can get from your REAP grant. And I believe that they're still taking applications quarterly. I might be wrong. That there was some news, some talk that they might have to push that back a little bit, but the deadline on that is in March here. And so you just click those things off, and then all of your pricing comes in. You can look at an online proposal. So once you've selected, oh, it's going to tell me I didn't save all that stuff. Then it has a cover letter. And here it's going to tell you this is something you could supply to your customer. It's just got all the pretty pictures. I kind of messed all that up. Here's the panel that you selected. So this is their cute little advertisement for that. Here's their profile of how their production is going to be meeting consumption. And it gives you a bunch of stuff that I just sort of gloss over, how many car miles was avoided, how many trees you saved, that kind of thing. And new bill, old bill. The things I mostly look at is when we get down here, the payback. It will tell you the payback based on your incentives. That doesn't feel exactly right. It didn't take into effect the REAP grant. Oh, I didn't click it. Okay. So in this case, if I click the REAP grant, let's go back. Let me just show you. Right now it's showing 386,000. This is your tax credit. It's not in an energy community, and it's got a 12-year payback. So if I want to go back into design and I decide, okay, well, let's say it's in an energy community now, and we're going to incorporate the REAP grant. Then I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to go into my online proposal. And I should have picked one of these that I'm completely done with before I start messing with all of this. And I can go into my proposal, and now it's going to, when we go down here to these paybacks and the like, I guess it's still calculating here. You can see that we're actually down now to 193,000 as the cost. So it deducted out these benefits, the 10% bonus credit, the REAP grant of 25%, and the simple payback. Where is that diagram? Oh, right here. So 6 years, 1 month is the payback on it now with these incentives. So quite nice. It puts it together in a nice package, and you can then provide that to the customer. I usually will also incorporate a printout from PV Watts just to show that the amount of production looks similar. This program tends to draw its data about production from PV Watts, so those numbers are going to come in pretty close. Sometimes you got to jigger around the efficiency of your system a little bit because you're not quite sure how this thing has been set up, what they're derating in your system. So sometimes you got to play with that just to get the numbers to match up fairly closely, because this is saying it's producing 298,494 kilowatt hours per year. Well, if you plugged in the same azimuth, the same orientation at the same location with the system size into PV watts, you should get something similar. You should get a number that's very close to that. But the unknown is what is the efficiency on this? And you can set some of those efficiencies, your D rate, um, in this system as well, in the design phase. I didn't mess around with that. So, anybody have any questions about this before I jump out of the program here?
Yeah, Jay, can
Yeah.
you got me?
Yep. Go ahead, Dennis.
So within the black box of the calculations, it's never clear to me with these programs what is the interest rates that are built into the calculations and the time value of money. Uh, is that apparent in this program?
Yes, they do have the option here. Like this would be, you can factor in how much are the loans going to be, what are the interest rates going to be, and that will then change your payback period.
Sure.
The system I designed here was assuming a cash payment, so so we didn't factor any of that in. But here we could put in some of these, like it says sample 20 years 2.99%, and I guess you would, I haven't used this, but here's where you would plug in some of that. um, so it will do that. I know it will.
Okay.
I had a quick question,
Sure.
um, Jay. I saw that the bill of materials had a listing for or an item for the panels. How about the balance of the system,
Yeah.
inverters, etc.?
Yeah, here, if you wanted to go ahead and do that and go all the way through it, see over
Hmm.
on the left there, you can see there's mounting systems. So in this case, you would select what type of roof you're dealing with, and it gives you a bunch of different options. Then it would also tell you what system do I want to use. It's got Iron Ridge. I don't know, does it have other ones? It just seems to come up with Iron Ridge. It may be that the only mounting system that's in here is Iron Ridge. It's not all
Okay.
bad. Oh no, here's some others. I guess you can select your components. Renusol, I'm not familiar with those. So you can pick. I guess I had just defaulted to Iron Ridge in mine. So there's a place where you can select what railing, what mounting system you want. Then there's also an option here. You can go in and select your inverter, and you can auto select saying pick the best inverter for this system, or you can pick your own. I've done that where I've gone in for smaller systems, for example, and specifically picked Enphase because I know it's going to be a microinverter system. But for most of my designs here, where I'm trying to give the customers just a rough idea, I don't bother picking the inverters. But if you're doing this for yourself, you can go in and pick your inverters as well. And then if you're wanting to pick batteries, you can pick your battery as well. Let's see which ones it gives you here. Which do you like? Oh, I guess it goes into a design assistant. And so that's sort of like a financial analyst. You can't just ask them what they're charging. It's going to walk you through it and come to the end. They got to find out how much money you have first before they'll tell you how much they're going to charge. So, um, and then it looks like there's going to be other things. So, oh, you can get optimizers, isolators, cables, EV chargers, heat pumps, lots of things. So this program's a lot more powerful than what I've done with it. But the more you use it, the more you'll find it can do. And then it will give you a whole bill of materials that go with all of that. And then you can, I also know that it's got a customer management system integrated in. So if you want to use it, if you're a seller, you can manage the stage of the project. Has the proposal been sent? Has it been agreed upon? Has cash payments been made? There's a lot more stuff there, and which is pretty impressive considering it's, again, a free system. But every step of the way, obviously, by promoting some of the materials here, by allowing you to purchase through them, these are ways they can monetize. So they're giving you the design package for free, and then all of the corollary activities, they're going to make a few pennies on each one, probably more than a few pennies. So any other questions on this?
Jay,
Yeah.
if you run into a situation where you've got a customer that has a portion of their home, we've got one that has a portion of his home or the buildings on the meter are backed up by a standby generator. He's got another building on the premises that feeds through from the same meter, but is not connected to that generator. And he's wanting us to size out a little solar system to provide backup power for that building. Is there a program available besides what I'm looking at is for the HVAC, especially the run times and whatever? Is there any program for that is like area region specific? It can give you some information on how long to plan in run times for air conditioning and heating.
Oh boy. There probably are. I'm not familiar with them. Now you're going to need on something like that. I'm assuming the generator has an auto transfer switch that's built into it to disconnect from the grid,
Yes.
those specific loads. But are you going to need a second one to disconnect your battery system?
The individual wants to do a, like when the power goes off, he wants to go straight to battery. He does not want a grid tie.
Oh, okay. So he wants it. Yeah, he wants it grid tied when the grid's operating, or standalone all the time.
No, he wants it. He wants to be operating off of the grid when the power is on, but if power goes off, he wants to opt to battery backup.
Yeah. So that would be a simple AC coupled or DC coupled system. And you'll probably, need another transfer switch to disconnect, unless that I'm assuming the generator is hooked into a sub panel of some sort, because only some of the loads.
What happened? Well, how this is set up is he's got a 320 amp meter. The 200 comes off and feeds the main facility, and then he's got another 125 on the other side that feeds the other. The generator is in between the main is in between the 200 amp system panel and the house, and so it takes care of that. So the other building is not connected to the generator in any way, so I don't have to worry about backfeed there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just worried about backfeed to the grid.
There would have to be a disconnect there.
Yeah, so that's going to add to it. So the other question is, I've never run into that where you have, I guess it would be just two sub panels, one serviced by the generator and one serviced by the solar battery.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But that's going to be a little bit complicated, I imagine. Yeah. I wonder what, yeah, I guess not answering your first question and then not answering the question I raised for myself is of no help. But yeah, it's going to be complicated and probably pretty expensive.
The HVAC is the only thing that's got me. I mean, I can figure the loads on everything pretty much, except I'm not quite sure on the run times.
Well, you've got an existing building, right? So couldn't you just look at historic data of usage? You don't necessarily have to worry about, you can just say, okay, on these days, which are fairly typical, this is how much power it uses.
Well, I could, but then I still have to separate that out because it all goes through the same meter.
Yeah, but you could put some sort of like kilowatt meter or something like that on those loads.
I could put a recorder on it. Yes, I can.
Yeah, and then just find out what they use on a typical, for a typical week, for example, or and divide by 7, or for a typical day.
Okay, I can handle that.
Yeah, I think that'd be easier than trying to figure out what's the rule of thumb, and because that's always going to be an approximation. Since you've got an existing system, you may as well just measure it. So,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
all right. Anybody else have any questions there? I'm gonna take this off. Whoops. Oh, yeah, I was just going to add after we did that the customer service, the what do you call that? Customer record management is integrated into that. And again, that's a system I've not used, but I would invite you to explore it. If you just go into OpenSolar and upload the program, sign up for an account, it's worth playing with. Even if you're not in this as a business, if you just want to design your own home, it will give you a sense of what the system should cost, and what's involved with it. So, any questions before we call this to an end here?
Jay, this is Ted. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hey, could you go back and just give me your thoughts on winter bias versus summer bias, particularly in northern latitudes? Off grid, I bias mine winter because that's where I need the most advantage from the solar, and I don't need to have it as so much in the summer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the summer bias is pretty straightforward if you're grid tied, because here in North America, I can't think of any examples where winter bias would be preferred, would give you more power over the course of the year if you're grid tied. But if you're standalone, you're basically faced with a different set of problems. You want power when you need power. You don't want to necessarily maximize how much power you produced over the course of the year. You want to maximize the alignment of power produced with power consumed. And so that may turn out to be a winter bias if you use more power in the wintertime, or even the same amount of power every month. There's what they call the design ratio, if I remember right. What you do is typically you'll take the amount of insulation. Boy, I'm going by memory, but you go month by month rather than annualized. You just say, what is the insulation for this month? And what is my power needs for that month? And when you put them all in a table, you essentially find what month is the worst case scenario. When power is perhaps not being produced and consumption is at its highest, for instance, might be in February, and then you design your system for that month. Well, you can also offset it by when you change the altitude, like the winter bias versus the summer bias. You may find then you're producing more power than you would in the winter months, less power than you would otherwise in the summer months, but those may better closely align with your needs. So I guess what I would do is you got to play back and forth. I'm not sure that I'm not aware of a tool that does it for you. Yep. Peter, you've got a comment? Maybe you can help me out.
Yeah, same calculations as far as the panel orientation, but the application where it would count is when, for example, you're grid tied, but the utility squares the account once a month, where
Yeah.
your surplus in the summer, while it's great for the annual total, it isn't worth any money. And so then you're trying to, like the off-grid people, really, you're trying to avoid the greatest deficiency
Mm-hmm.
so that you use your own electricity in that month. The off-gridders, of course, are using that electricity in the same day or within the capacity of their battery bank.
Yep. You could probably just play around with PV watts and just keep changing the orientation and go back and forth. There's got to be a program out there somewhere that will do all of those kind of calculations for you. I'm just not familiar with it, but yeah, as Pete was pointing out, it could just be that the utility is truing up your account every month, at which point you're not going to carry over a balance. Or they may be just paying you almost nothing in their net metering, and you don't want to invest in batteries. So, because with net metering, if you're paying them 20 cents and getting 4 cents, why do you want to overproduce in the summertime? Because you're just not receiving the benefits of it. So you might go with a winter orientation in those scenarios as well. So nothing is ever as simple as it seems. So
It helps. Thanks.
okay, well, hopefully, yeah, you're obviously on standalone, you're already on the right track. You're already doing winter bias. So, all right, well, I think we're out of time. I appreciate everybody attending, and we'll see you guys next week. All right, take care. Bye-bye.